right, guys. I want to say thank you to everyone for coming. I did a talk last year for Z-Day, and there's probably about 2 times, 3 times the amount of people. So that shows that we're growing, although that we are a small group. And I'm sorry I do not speak very loudly, so forgive me for that. But I want to talk a little bit about the public health problem. And I'm sort of banking off one of PJ's essays that are published on the Zeitgeist Movement website. And this is something that I relate to personally, being part of the, being a member of the healthcare field, as well as this has also been like a internal dialogue that's been going on inside me for several years. So it's great to have the opportunity just to go ahead and make this a presentation and spread the information to all you guys. Let's start by defining health. Everyone basically has their own definition of what health is. Mine is the capacity for an organism to thrive in its environment, for someone to be free of disease, and to maintain an internal harmony between cells, tissues, and this is known as homeostasis. And this harmony is something that's important because I think we all agree right now there's a disharmony that's happening. And inside the body, when there's a disharmony, say for example when there's one cell in the body that's over-replicating itself, that's cancer, and that sucks a lot of energy away from other parts and tissues in the body. And that's a lot like the social system we have now. And when I started this, I sort of wanted to sort of simplify it a little bit, just like as if I was giving this talk to someone who may have not heard of the Zeitgeist movement before. So public health is just comprised of smaller units of individuals with varying degrees of health. And individuals, making off some of Gary's ideas he presented earlier on memes, they acquire these memes and they develop institutions. And these institutions that we have now are acquired from memes and from a society that was very primitive, with very limited information. And so we develop these institutions, such as the party system, the educational institution, law, business, and medicine. And to fully care for a society, we need to look at these institutions. We need to question the validity to present-day knowledge. And this is a very overlooked aspect to those institutions. It's the monetary system. And we can all see how it's a meme, an idea, as Gary had explained earlier, that often goes unquestioned. And because it's based on the money system is based on debt, that debt has to fall somewhere, and there becomes a disharmony, a disbalance. And has anyone seen the film Money is Debt? That's a really good one, a really great documentary that explains money. So, a good one.
What was the title?
Money is Debt.
Is it on Netflix?
Netflix, don't know if it's on Netflix, but it is on YouTube.
It's about debt currency, really.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, and back to being the individual here. Our scientific understanding has brought us to the conclusion that we are a little bit more complicated than we had previously learned. And not complicated in a bad way, but that we are biopsychosocial organisms, that we respond in very intimate and unique ways with our environment. And has everyone seen Zeitgeist Moving Forward?
Yes.
Okay, anyone, show of hands, not seen it?
Not seeing what?
Zeitgeist Moving Forward.
Oh,
Okay, good, because I'm going to be showing about an 8-minute clip and then about a 2-minute clip. These video clips they explain more about the biosocial organism and the so-called genetic argument.
Most
Okay.
crazy-making yet widespread and potentially dangerous notions is, oh, that behavior is genetic. Now, what does that mean? It means all sorts of subtle stuff if you sort of know modern biology, but for most people out there, what it winds up meaning is a deterministic view of life, one rooted in biology and genetics. Genes equal things that can't be changed. Genes equal things that are inevitable and that you might as well not waste resources trying to fix, might as well not put societal energies into trying to improve because it's inevitable, it's unchangeable. And that is sheer nonsense.
It is widely thought that conditions like ADHD are genetically programmed, conditions like schizophrenia are genetically programmed. The truth is the opposite. Nothing is genetically programmed. They're very rare diseases. I mean, a small handful, extremely sparsely represented in the population, that are truly genetically determined. Most complex conditions might have a predisposition that has a genetic component, but a predisposition is not the same as a predetermination. The whole search for the source of diseases in the genome was doomed to failure before anybody even thought of it, because most diseases are not genetically predetermined. Heart disease, cancer, strokes, rheumatoid conditions, autoimmune conditions in general, mental health conditions, addictions, these are none of them genetically determined. Breast cancer, for example, out of 100 women with breast cancer, only 7 will carry the breast cancer genes. 93 do not. And out of 100 women who do have the genes, not all of them will get cancer.
Genes are not just things that make us behave in a particular way regardless of our environment. Genes give us different ways of responding to our environment. In fact, it looks as if some of the early childhood influences of a kind of child rearing affects gene expression, actually turning on and off different genes to put you on a different developmental track, which may suit the kind of world you've got to deal with.
So, for example, a study done in Montreal with suicide victims looked at autopsies of the brains of these people. And it turned out that if a suicide victim, these are usually young adults, had been abused as children, the abuse actually caused a genetic change in the brain that was absent in the brains of people who had not been abused. That's an epigenetic effect. Epi means on top of, so that the epigenetic influence is what happens environmentally to either activate or deactivate certain genes.
In New Zealand, there's a study that was done in a town called Dunedin, in which a few thousand individuals were studied from birth up to into their 20s. What they found was that they could identify a genetic mutation, an abnormal gene, which did have some relation to the predisposition to commit violence, but only if the individual had also been subjected to severe child abuse. In other words, a child with this abnormal gene would be no more likely to be violent than anybody else, and in fact they actually had a lower rate of violence than people with normal genes, as long as they weren't abused as children.
great additional example of the ways in which genes are not be-all, end-all. Fancy technique where you can take a specific gene out of a mouse, that mouse and its descendants will not have that gene. You have knocked out that gene. So there's this one gene that codes for a protein that has something to do with learning and memory, and this fabulous demonstration, knock out that gene and you have a mouse that doesn't learn as well. Ooh, a genetic basis for intelligence. What was much less appreciated in that landmark study that got picked up by the media left and right is take those genetically impaired mice and raise them in a much more enriched, stimulating environment than your normal mice in a lab cage, and they completely overcame that deficit. So when one says in a contemporary sense that, oh, this behavior is genetic, to the extent that that's even a valid sort of phrase to use, what you're saying is there is a genetic contribution to how this organism responds to environment. Genes may influence the readiness with which an organism will deal with a certain environmental challenge. You know, that's not the version most people have in their minds. And not to be too soapboxing, but run with the old sort of version of it's genetic, and it's not that far from a history of eugenics and things of that sort. It's a widespread misconception, and it's a potentially fairly dangerous one.
One reason that the sort of biological explanation for violence, one reason that hypothesis is potentially dangerous, it's not just misleading, it can really do harm, is because if you believe that, you could very easily say, well, there's nothing we can do to change the predisposition people have to becoming violent. All we can do if somebody becomes violent is punish them, you know, lock them up or execute them. But we don't need to worry about changing the social environment or the social preconditions that may lead people to become violent, because that's irrelevant.
The genetic argument allows us the luxury of ignoring past and present historical and social factors. And in the words of Louis Menand, he wrote in the New Yorker, very astutely, he said, "It's all in the genes, an explanation for the way things are that does not threaten the way things are. Why should someone feel unhappy or engage in antisocial behavior when that person is living in the freest and most prosperous nation on earth? It can't be the system. There must be a flaw in the wiring somewhere," which is a good way of putting it. So the genetic argument is simply a cop-out, which allows us to ignore the social and economic and political factors that in fact underlie many troublesome behaviors. Addictions are usually considered to be a drug-related issue, but looking at it more broadly, I define addiction as any behavior that is associated with craving, with temporary relief, and with long-term negative consequences, along with an impairment of control over it, so that the person wishes to give it up or promises to do so, but can't follow through. And when you understand that, then you can see that there are many more addictions than simply those related to drugs. So there's workaholism, there's addiction to shopping, to the internet, to video games. There's the addiction to power. People have power, but they want more and more and more. Nothing is ever enough for them. Acquisition, corporations that must own more and more. The addiction to oil, or at least to the wealth and to the products made accessible to us by oil. Look at the negative consequences on the environment. We're destroying the very earth that we inhabit for the sake of that addiction. Now, these addictions are far more devastating in their social consequences than the cocaine or heroin habits of my downtown East Side patients. Yet they're rewarded and considered to be respectable. The tobacco company executive that shows a higher profit will get a much bigger reward. He doesn't face any negative consequences legally or otherwise. In fact, he's a respected member of the board of several other corporations. But tobacco smoke-related diseases kill 5.5 million people around the world every year. In the United States, they kill 400,000 people a year. And these people are addicted to what? To profit. To such a degree are they addicted that they're actually in denial. about the impact of their activities, which is typical for addicts, is denial. And that's a respectable one. It's respectable to be addicted to profit no matter what the cost. So what is acceptable and what is respectable is a highly arbitrary phenomenon in our society. And it seems like the greater the harm, the more respectable the addiction. There's a general myth that drugs in themselves are addictive. In fact, the war on drugs is predicated on the idea that if you interdict the sources of drugs, you can deal with addiction that way. Now, if we understand addiction in a broader sense, we see that nothing in itself is addictive. No substance, no drug is by itself addictive, and no behavior is by itself addictive. Many people can go shopping without becoming shopaholics. Not everybody becomes a food addict. Not everyone who drinks a glass of wine becomes an alcoholic. So the real issue is what makes people susceptible, because it's the combination of a susceptible individual and the potentially addictive substance or behavior that actually then makes for full flowering of addiction. In short, it's not the drug that's addictive, it's the question of the susceptibility of the individual to being addicted to a particular substance or behavior. If we wish to understand what then makes some people susceptible, we actually have to look at their life experience. The old idea, although it's old, but it's still broadly held, that addictions are due to some genetic cause is simply scientifically untenable. What the case is actually is that certain life experiences make people susceptible. Life experiences that not only shape the person's personality and psychological needs, but also their very brains in certain ways. And that process begins in utero. It's been shown, for example, that if you stress mothers during pregnancy, their children are more likely to have traits that predispose them to addictions. And that's because development is shaped by the psychological and social environment. So the biology of human beings is very much affected by and programmed by their life experiences beginning in utero.
Environment does not begin at birth. Environment begins as soon as you have an environment. As soon as you're a fetus, you are subject to whatever information is coming through mom's circulations, hormones, levels of nutrients. Great landmark example of this, something called the Dutch hunger winter. 1944, Nazis occupying Holland. For a bunch of reasons, they decide to take all the food and divert it to Germany. For 3 months, everybody there is starving. Tens of thousands of people starve to death. What the Dutch hunger winter effect is, if you were a second or third trimester fetus during the starvation, your body learned something very unique during that time. As it turns out, second, third trimester, something that your body is going about trying to learn about the environment is, well, how menacing of a place is it out there? How plentiful? How much nutrients am I getting by way of mom's circulation? Be a fetus who is starving during that time, and your body programs forever after to be really, really, really stingy with your sugar and fat, and what you do is you store every bit of it. Be a Dutch hunger winter fetus, and half a century later, everything else being equal, you are more likely to have high blood pressure, obesity, or metabolic syndrome. That is environment coming in a very unexpected place.
You can stress animals in a laboratory when they're pregnant, and their offspring will be more likely to use cocaine and alcohol as adults. You can stress human mothers. For example, in a British study, women who are abused in pregnancy will have higher levels of the stress hormone cortisol in their placenta at birth, and their children are more likely to have conditions that predispose them to addictions by age 7 or 8. So in utero stress already prepares the ground for all kinds of mental health issues. Israeli study done prior on children born to mothers who were pregnant prior to the onset of the 1967 war. These women, of course, are very stressed, and their offspring have a higher incidence of schizophrenia than the average cohort. So there's plenty of evidence now that prenatal effects have a huge impact on the development.
Those people who just spoke, they're also authors, and here are a list of some of their books for you guys to check out. When the Body Says No, Understanding the Stress-Disease Connection is a real good one. also James Gilligan, Robert Sapolsky, and Richard Wilmanson. So the point I'm really trying to make here is when we look at someone's health, we're looking at a person's health, we're not looking just at the person, we're also looking at the environment they're in. But in the healthcare community, myself being part of that, we don't really address the environment. And we've developed these institutions that don't address the environment. We may have scientific methods to treat disease, but at the same time, we're still not applying that methodology more broadly. So that's the disconnect here, and that's what I'm really wanting to put forward. And I've been a part of the movement for about 4 years. I've also been a part of the healthcare community as a paramedic for that long, and which leads me to the next part of what I'm going to talk about, which are a lot of the conditions that I see when I get out of the ambulance and go to treat someone. These are a lot of the things I see routinely. I'm very often in impoverished communities. When I go in someone's home, I typically do not see fruits and vegetables laying around. I see very cheap food, chips, stuff like that. And at the same time, we're not blaming the person for this stuff. It's the environment that sort of created that condition. Okay. Very often they're not educated, and there's a distortion of values, which is direct relationship to how the environment, the memes, the institutions, and stuff like that. So the result is good for the healthcare industry. This is great stuff for them because it generates money, profit. So they're making lots of money off this stuff. So it's self-reinforcing. So and those who work are also working in conditions under extreme stress. Myself, fatigue. We suffer fatigue a lot of times, which causes poor health too. So, well, how do we change this stuff? Okay, and this is just a slide that shows more of what you guys are already aware, how disease creates industry. Okay, we don't really make a whole lot of money off healthy people, so unfortunately. Scientific method, something that is implemented inside the medical community, but like I said earlier, it's not on a larger scale. And this is just an overview of the scientific method. And I'd like to say with the service I work for, we've implemented the scientific method in a progressive degree. Again, not in a more broad perspective, which hopefully we'll be doing that very soon. But we've implemented it in a way to where we've seen success rates in our resuscitations from CPR up 40% by using scientific methods. So it is a method that does work. Okay. But what we need to do is just reorient our values so that we integrate it into a larger view. Okay. And this just talks about a resource-based economy. A resource-based economy is an economy that uses the scientific method, as most of us are aware. The term and meaning of a resource-based economy was originated by Jacques Fresco. It is a holistic socioeconomic system in which all goods and services are available without the use of money, credits, barter, or any other system of debt or servitude. All resources become the common heritage of all of the inhabitants, not just a select few. The premise upon which this system is based is that the earth is abundant with plentiful resources. A holistic view. or practice of rationing resources through monetary methods is irrelevant and counterproductive to our survival. So our goals in the movement are just to educate people, to integrate these values individually so they can be represented in a more larger way. And educating people on the root cause of disease and disorder being the monetary system and its values it perpetuates. And like Gary said, like earlier, I'm constantly updating my values too. I'm looking for new ways to improve my health, okay? And I'm not very shy about that. When I work with people, and because of the environment I work in, we have to eat on the run, you know? We kind of have to grab food when we can because we don't know when we're going to get another call and we have to go out somewhere. So with my partner, I love my partner to death. He's a great guy, great paramedic, but I don't eat at McDonald's, okay? I won't eat at McDonald's. He knows that. So, so I ended up cooking a lot of the times at our station, but this is part of showing that value system and having other people, educating others as well. And we can all do that in varying degrees. So health revisited and is the ability to achieve balance between external and internal processes, the capacity to thrive in its environment, not restricted by a monetary system, and essentially to be free from disease. Now, a certain degree of attention is good for growth, but I'm not really talking about that. But health is something that's very important to me, and I hope it is to all you guys as well. But that's my talk. Hopefully you guys have some questions.
Not a question, but just personal insight. Recently I've started eating a lot healthier just because of watching documentaries like Food Matters and,
Okay.
and other ones that are similar. I've found that just in a couple of weeks of eating healthy, my attitude and motivation have improved greatly.
Okay.
So I'm really starting to use the scientific method in my eating, my thought process of eating.
Yeah. Yeah, and eating the proper...
Good energy, you'll get out good results.
Exactly. That's just exactly what I was going to say. Eating the proper food, when you can, get organic food, fruits and vegetables. If you eat out a lot, try to learn how to cook some. We eat a lot of protein in our environment, a lot of excess protein. So you might want to look at maybe not having a meal with meat or something to that effect. You don't have to become vegetarian. I'm personally vegetarian. I'm not exactly vegetarian. I eat fish. But we eat a lot. Studies have shown that we eat too much meat in our society, and that's enforced by the selling of meat. And eating proper food adds more energy. You increase your energy, as well as doing some exercise, and that is also helpful. So.
Decrease sugar.
Exactly. Exactly.
Just cut it out.
My mom actually, she recently gave me a bag of coconut sugar. I've never had it before, but it's actually pretty good. Yeah.
Anything coconut, yeah. Coconut oil, coconut water.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Anyone else?
I was going to say, you mentioned about organic foods, and it does seem pretty basic. If you think about it, from the time you were really little, all your life you've been told, don't put that in your mouth. And then we get older and we watch TV and we run around and we're thinking, well, we don't have time. But really, what you put in your body is super important. So, I mean, don't put anything in your body that's going to hurt you. When you read it, find out, investigate, see what's the difference between, McDonald's and an organic, meal you cook at home. Find out what it is and care about yourself enough. It's really important. If you support the health, there's not a lot of room for disease if you just support the healthy side.
I always like the
healthcare workers talking.
Yeah.
the anachronism for the standard American diet. Sad.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really sad. And if you realize that your food is your fuel, and just like you wouldn't pour salt in your gas tank and expect your car to run, you got to know that the fuel you're putting in your body is very specific. Biochemistry is a very specific thing, and everybody's body's different, so you have to find out what works for you. And you have to be a detective in a lot of cases.
Also, I have seizures, and I've noticed that when I eat organic, I have less seizures.
It's very interesting.
It's absolutely true.
It does.
That's
Interesting.
not surprising to me at all.
One of the causes of disease is just, I don't know specifically about seizures, but a buildup of toxins, which are in food. So that's very interesting.
I don't know the scientist's name, but he was the one that discovered that the lack of vitamin D caused rickets. And he made a very revolutionary statement back then that someday we would find that every disease known to man is nutritionally based. And they still don't teach more than one semester of nutrition to doctors.
It's not profitable.
Yeah, exactly.
No, because they're invested illness.
You can't write you a prescription to Whole Foods. You know?
Exactly.
That's why they keep trying to take over the vitamins and supplements, right?
Yeah. So guys.
Also, it's a lot less expensive to eat garbage than it is to go out and get better
In
food.
the short term, that's true, but in the long run, this is your life. It's your body, it's your life. That's the most valuable thing you have.
I'm saying though that like when he talks about going into impoverished nations, impoverished areas, those people don't have a choice.
That's there, but we're so right now we're thinking just for yourself.
But even here, socioeconomically, I have clients that are on food stamps, can't afford to shop at Earth Fare or Whole Foods. They're going to the food bank, and half the time the food at the food bank is out of date, and it's all starch-based.
You can get brown rice,
You can.
beans,
Here.
chickpeas.
Here, not
Anywhere.
where I
cheap.
am.
It's cheap, you can live very, very
Yes,
cheap.
you can do that.
If you learn how to cook it nicely, take a carrot, chop it into really small slices and fry it with some oil and salt, sea salt. Don't, get that other garbage, that's like pure sugar. If you educate yourself, you can live very healthy and very, very
You're
cheap.
talking about people that don't really have all those abilities sometimes.
And when it comes down to accessibility and then socioeconomic status, where are you? What do you have money-wise? Where can you go?
And what kind of stores are around?
Yeah.
Yeah, because in some neighborhoods they don't even have grocery stores. They have convenience stores. And what do you get in convenience stores?
Convenience.
People just don't know any better.
Right.
Even, I went to college. I went to nursing school, and the nutrition class was like a week long, and it was a complete joke.
Based on what the FDA says.
Yeah, it was just an embarrassment. I actually had a really enthusiastic teacher, and she taught us outside curriculum about organics, and gave us real instruction. But like the actual nutrition classes are just laughable. Even at a college level, it's an embarrassment.
Well, think about the FDA standards when it says that you're getting 100% of what the FDA requires for a vitamin. Their requirements are for the sustainment of life. Not thriving, not health, just to sustain life. So it's minimum amount of what you really need.
You bring up a really good point. There's more to nutrition than just merely calories. A lot of people just talk about calories like we're machines that only require fuel, but we also require other things like water and vitamins and stuff like that. So
and never soda. It's not required. Never.
So,
Speaking of water, make sure you drink reverse osmosis or purified water. Fluoridated water is all sorts of side effects. Like 77% of the US is fluoridated water.
I do the best I can with water. I recently got a reverse osmosis machine, but the thing is, from where I live, I can't implement it. So I got a really good deal on it, though. If anybody's interested, like $60.
Get yourself a filter, water filter, it's a charcoal filter. It will take out, most of the fluoride, especially the fluoride,
Fluoride's very hard.
No charcoal.
Either a bone char, activated room jar, or reverse osmosis. Purified spring water.
Yeah, we have spring, so I had research that.
All right, man. Take it over there, buddy.
What if you have well water?
Well water.
The well water. You're probably still better than city water.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah.